So from a starting standpoint, Black Voices Movement, you shared a little bit about it being a brand, a ministry under Circuit Riders. From there, what is the story of how the Black Voices Movement was birthed?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have the historian
gosh.
introduce this one.
Oh my goodness. How do I condense it? Because it's like there's so many things that led up to it.
Yes.
So I'll give like a quick preamble on like kind of things that led into it. We had in 2016 Brad LaChapelle and another man named John Paul Howard that pioneered the HBCU tour of CR.
Yes.
So we do something called Carry the Love, and we've been doing that for years. And it's an evangelistic outreach to university campuses. And within that, John and Brad were talking about how there needed to be a specific, like a targeted outreach to HBCUs. That there is a specific call and a destiny on students on those campuses. And that you can't just kind of like, it's not just gonna happen, like reaching them, like you have to intentionally pursue them.
Yeah.
Just like if you feel like a specific people group highlighted in the Lord, like you intentionally pursue that people group. And that the HBCUs would be a catalyst for awakening and revival in the Black community unto a diverse missions movement. And so they started, I think the first tour went in 2016, and then there were multiple teams that went after that. And so that was kind of the beginnings. And then in 2020,
Yes.
2020,
That year.
20, yes, that year. I'd say 2020 was a watershed year for the whole body of Christ not because there was a stirring up of the pot, but because things became uncovered.
Yes.
And it was like the Lord, Brian Brent, actually, the leader of CR, he said this. It was like the Lord is holding us to the fire on these issues. He's not going to let us out. And because he wants to deal with it, because it matters to him. And so we saw a lot of just things that haven't been really talked about enough start to be uncovered in really painful ways in the nation, with the death of Ahmaud Arbery and then Breonna Taylor and then George Floyd, and just the debate of debates about even language, and is this political, is this gospel, like how do you talk about these things, you know what I mean? And I think what was so beautiful about that season was the bold, gracious, and yet unapologetic way in which the leadership of CR addressed everything that was happening, both internally and then the language that we used to communicate to those that look to us for gospel leadership, I guess. And I had so many friends that were part of other missions agencies that were saying, like, there were minorities in other missions agencies, saying it's so healing to see the way that CR leadership, that's predominantly white, is handling these conversations. It feels like I have permission to be in pain, and that my pain isn't a hindrance to the unity of the faith or the furtherance of the gospel. Like I can actually bring my pain to the table and deal with it, and also ask, like, God, what do you have to say about this? And so I think Circuit Riders started talking about it. Internally, we had a lot of really wild conversations as a movement. And then we got to be a part of some of the response, even on the heels of what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. Danny and a team of 4, I think, went a couple days after. Like they went that weekend. So it happened on a Monday. They went that weekend, and then they came back, and then the whole team of us went that following week, and just watched as the Lord moved, as we chose to stand proximate to the pain of the people, but also came with, man, there is a solution, and it's the cross.
Yes.
And so it was beautiful how God moves, and I don't really have time to get into all of that, but that was kind of the beginning stages. And then fast forward to Black History Month 2021, and basically every Monday night, we do Monday night services here. And at the time, because of COVID, we weren't able to gather in person. So we were doing it on Zoom, and we were live streaming it, or not on Zoom, we were doing it on a YouTube live stream. Yeah. And each one of those weeks, the core leadership of CR had planned to talk about specific challenges, and even in the conversation, and to address it from a biblical perspective. So it starts with Brian Brent, leader of CR, who passed away last year. It started with him talking about like, what does it look like to walk a mile in the shoes of another? Like the call to compassion and the call to radical courage in that place of compassion, and almost humanizing the conversation, every way in which it become really political, and like really political conversations can dehumanize the other.
Yes.
And Brian was like, we're not going to go there because that's not what the gospel does. We're going to address the humanity and the real pain and the real challenges of people that might not look like you, and lives that you don't live. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about Jesus's grief over injustice, because it's real. And then the following week, Nick Brent literally preached on white supremacy. And he's like, to say white supremacy doesn't exist is a deception, because the human heart, apart from Jesus, is full of pride.
Yeah.
And so if you're exalting self, and you're exalting even the benefits of whatever your dominance is, that is supremacy. And it's like, for this specific conversation that we're having, let's talk about white supremacy. It's real, it's an antichrist spirit, it's a sin, and it grieves the heart of God. And I think just the fact that he wasn't shying away from even using those terms, but then he brought it into a gospel conversation, it started to shift even so much of what was happening in our community. We had Group Me at the time, and Group Me is blowing up with people weeping, getting set free, feeling permission. I remember when someone asked, like, how many nationalities are in this community? And people start sharing, like, my family comes from here, my family comes from here. And one guy's like, man, my family's Korean, and I never really felt like I could use my real Korean name in this community because I felt like I'd be ridiculed, but this is my Korean name, and I'm gonna let you know that this is who I really am. And there was like a corporate freedom that started to break out as we addressed like what was happening in our nation at the time. It was so beautiful. And so there was more that happened, but Brian sat on a Zoom, Brian and his wife Christy, they had a Zoom with all of the Black staff at the time. And
some students.
And some of the students. And he was like, I just want to hear, how are you? How has this been? Like, be honest, be candid. And just getting the pulse of how everyone's been feeling, questions that people had, just the real like wrestle that you feel. And it was so beautiful because Brian just kind of said, I feel like we need to have a gathering.
Yeah.
and so long story short, we just said, okay, like let's gather young Black leaders from across the nation. We didn't really know a ton. And a few of us were on tour at the time. And so we just started inviting students. And then what was so beautiful to me was in Group Me, people were saying, okay, these students are coming from HBCUs. It's the middle of a semester. They can't just fly to California. How can we fund them to come?
Yeah.
And so our community is like taking an offering they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're not just saying like, God, heal the racial divide in America. They're like, how can I actively come alongside and undergird and see how this can happen? And so about 50 young leaders flew to California. And that was in April of 2021. And we were outside under a tent, outside of a church, literally on like the cement parking lot. But the glory of God fell on that tent.
Yeah.
And Danny shared, and Eola came from Upper Room, and she shared, like the response, almost like spontaneous, like the passing of the mic from Brian and other leaders in CR. And God just started to drop on the reality of whenever there's an oppressed people biblically, the Lord has like an invitation and a mandate of deliverance.
Yes.
And he's also inviting them to walk in radical forgiveness unto authority. And he's inviting them to sing. That there is a worship call from that place as well. And the motif of Moses kept coming up. And so it was so powerful, and we were so marked in that tent. And every single one of us was like, man, like we have friends that we wish could be in this tent right now. And Yasmin just said, what if we did another gathering and we invited, what if 300 came? And it was kind of like those moments where you don't know that it's like a Holy Spirit moment until God just lands on your words.
Yeah.
And people started getting hit with the power of God in the tent.
Yeah.
Yaz got laid out. Jonathan got laid out. It was like power of God moment. And we're like, okay, God's doing something. We need to gather. And freedom and permission starts hitting all of CR. Like it poured into the next day with our staff meeting Monday nights. And God really just started moving it, launched from there. Yeah. And Brian really kind of, I want to say that he like gave the assist like hardcore, like because
he slam dunked.
Because he was just like, what if you guys made an album? And like, no, like none of us had ever thought of like, how do you even do a live album recording? Like none of us knew what to do.
And at this point, we still didn't have a name.
Literally, there was no name.
We were caught up into a storyline that we didn't originate.
Yeah.
It really felt like we were just, catching the wind of God.
Yes.
And it just didn't happen from a good idea.
Yeah.
It was a response from a people really broken.
Yeah.
From just partnering with God's heart in a place of intercession.
Yes.
And that's, I feel like, what unfolded and something that is now turned to be so beautiful and so dynamic by nature.
Yes.
And so needed.
Yeah.
Where it's, like Steph is saying, there's been such an emphasis on freedom and then such an emphasis on solution.
Yes.
Not found in human effort or ideas, but really just solution from heaven, biblical solution. And it's been unreal. And so that's so after that 50-person gathering, we then just, God was clearly on it, and it was like, we have to pray.
Yes.
And so we just took it into a season of prayer. And obviously there was unction during that moment where we're like, okay, there's something on this, and like, what if 300? What if there's 300 more people that wanted to get caught up in this reality, that not just agree with the narrative that is, I guess, standard for the typical Black person in America, but to really get caught up into what God's saying about a whole race, a whole group of individuals that He finds beautiful.
Yes.
And give them solution and trade it for whatever any of the plights that can be accustomed to. People that are African American and from Africa diaspora. So, and then the 300 gathering in August, and it has been a wild ride ever since.
Yes. It's been so fast, and Brian and Christy actually said that. They've prayed, and they're like, this is going to be the fastest, most accelerated movement that has ever come out of Circuit Riders. And it's been, it's been so beautiful to see. And I think what I love about Black Voices is, obviously the whole point of Black Voices is to empower young Black leaders into their Christ-centered callings and purposes.
Yes.
But what's been so powerful to me is that it is giving permission to everybody.
Yes.
It's not just like Black people come in the room and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And like non-Black people are like, wow, I wish I could be empowered too. What we've seen is that our whole community has taken on a vibrancy and a fullness that I didn't even know how to believe for that. Does that make sense? I didn't know that it was that was possible. It's almost like going from, the movies that are kind of like grayscale and then it becomes Technicolor.
Yes.
And you're like, whoa.
Great.
There's so much
example.
life here. And even Lindy Kofer, one of the worship leaders with Circuit Riders, she said that she has never felt more freedom and permission to be herself than because of what has been catalyzed in her own heart.
Yes.
Being around Black voices and the worship and everything that's come forth from it. So it's really cool to see how biblically, you see that the Lord lands on one person or one people to break through for a fuller expression, or to break through for everybody walking in freedom. And I think in Black Voices kind of being the vanguard, if you will, there's a breakthrough that we're seeing that everyone is walking in as Circuit Riders, and it's so exciting.
Yeah, I think that's probably the. I feel like we've asked a lot of people about different groups, organizations, and they kind of give a small synopsis of it. So that was great.
I told you she's a historian.
Yeah, you were. I'm listening. I'm sitting back. You're like, wow. I'm just staring at you talk. You're really great at communicating.
Thank you.
That was amazing.
Shows the importance of the memories too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just in your head, and you just kind of shared everything. So that was amazing.
Oh.
But like I remember, I actually had a friend who sent me the video, one of the videos you guys did. I can't remember where it was, and I was watching it. I remember the thing that I kind of took away from that was like, man, these people are so happy, you know, like that, because I didn't know Danny at the time. I just remember walking away like, man, they're happy, and then so I somehow ended up on the page, just kind of to read about, you know, the who we are page and what we do and different things like that. So it's like a full circle for me sitting here with you
That's
guys and
wild.
kind of just hearing some of the stories of how everything started.